Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me, as always, is Armin Navabi.
Hey.
We're recording this during an afternoon, and we're joined today by somebody I've been very, very impressed with reading online. Again, there are all of these really amazing young ex-Muslims that are coming out and speaking out, and so today's guest is certainly no exception. We're joined by Fay Rahman from the UK. Fay, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, nice to join you guys.
Yeah, so Fay is, you're relatively young. You're 24. You are British Bangladeshi. You used to be a Salafi Muslim, which is an ultra-conservative form of Muslim. You were also part of the Tableeghi Jamaat, which is a pretty hardcore religious organization. And you talked about how you wore niqab at the age of 11 as well. So, I mean, that's a pretty conservative Islamic background, but then you renounced your faith and you left the religion altogether in February 2017, and you started speaking about it recently. And I actually noticed you when you put out that video, Why I Left Islam, which was, a fantastic video. So, when we talked earlier, you said that you wanted to normalize leaving Islam in a way that young people who did it weren't thrown out of the house, weren't risking, being part of an honor violence or anything like that. So to talk a little bit about that, how was your journey when you started out, your family, and when did you become so religious?
I would say that I became quite religious while I was still quite young. I grew up in a Bengali community. My family's all Bengali. But my father has a form of psychosis. It hasn't been confirmed yet because he refused to see any kind of help. But and I think he tried to self-treat himself through religion. So he got more and more invested in religion, and he started looking into Islam. And he took us to a mosque that was very, very conservative. They were part of the Tableeghi Jamaat. So I would go there and I would learn how to recite Quran. I taught Quran for a little bit. That's where all of it started. And I took part in it partially because I was really interested in religion, and partially because I kind of wanted to be on board with everything that my dad was doing. I wanted to be there to support him and there to just encourage him into this way because I thought it was making him better. So I got into it and I became quite religious. I was also put into an Islamic secondary school. And after because I was in Tableeghi Jamaat up until I was 14. Up until 14, my dad was happy in there. He was quite consistently going to the mosque. And even though they're quite conservative, they're quite peaceful. Their whole focus is on praying and giving money and stuff like that. So it was nothing extreme in violent sense. It was more extreme in the ritualistic prayer sense, stuff like that. Also just giving da'wah and going door to door and asking people to come to Islam and things like that. Yeah. When I turned 14,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to, just for the sake of the audience, some of the terms that you use. So you grew up in a very conservative Muslim family, but they weren't the Islamist or jihadist. But you mentioned two things. You mentioned da'wah and you mentioned the Tableeghi Jamaat. Can you explain really quickly, just for our audience who doesn't know, what those things are?
Okay, so da'wah is basically just inviting people to Islam. So if you're in London, for example, in the UK, you find them at all events. So some Muslims will have a stall and they'll just be talking about Islam and trying to invite people to Islam. That's what da'wah is. The Tableeghi Jamaat, I don't know the entire history of it, but it is basically, they're like the Jehovah's Witnesses of Muslims. They go from door to door, they go to different countries, and their main focus is just trying to invite people into the religion. They're quite conservative. A lot of their followers are very strict hijab wearers. They pray 5 times a day. They give a lot in charity. They have a lot of focus on the worship side of Islam. And they don't really promote the idea of the lesser jihad or the fighting form of jihad. but they prioritize the greater jihad, which is worship and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, so you said you were a Quran teacher? Sorry, the audio was a little bit choppy there.
I did teach Qiraat, yeah. I taught people how to recite the Quran later on when I was like 15, 16 years old.
Like younger girls?
Yeah.
Sorry, your audio got choppy. Can you repeat that last part?
Yeah, so I would teach younger girls how to recite Quran.
Sure.
It was something that I was really proud of as a Muslim, that I could recite very well.
Did you do any da'wah yourself, like trying to bring people to Islam?
I had my fair share of like long debates about Islam. I think at the core of it, I don't think I was trying to invite people to Islam. I certainly had an interest in other religions because I was always raised in a bubble that was all Muslim. So like my friends were all Muslim, all of my family was Muslim. The school I was going to was Muslim. So I think there was this need for me to look into the outside world, especially as someone who grew up in a secular country, you know, who was surrounded by secular human beings but had no idea what they were. So I would go online, and the medium that I used was Yahoo Answers. I would always go there and I would ask questions, and I would answer questions about what I thought the answers were to people asking questions about Islam.
Sorry, the medium, what was the medium again? Sorry.
Yeah, Yahoo Answers. It's not really a medium
Yahoo
anymore.
Answers.
But it,
okay.
Yeah.
Yahoo Answers. Okay.
When I was around 14, I actually set up a blog where I would post like all the arguments I had online about Islam. It was really cringy. But yeah.
Can you give us some examples?
Not specifically, but I'm still in contact with one of the people that I used to have arguments with, and he's great. We're still really good friends, but we used to talk about gay rights a lot because he's very, very pro-LGBT, and now I am also pro-LGBT. But when I was a Muslim, I was against gay marriage, and he would sort of pry into my brain and be like, why are you so against it? And I would try to explain my perspective on it and what Islam says and stuff like that. And he was sort of like, do you really think that, you know, gay people should die because they're gay? And I'd be like, no, I don't really think that, but I think in an Islamic state that's just how it works. So
holy shit. Okay.
Well, I mean, that's what we hear a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like we hear generally. We had Daniel Hakikaju on this podcast, and you know, their main thing is that, you know, we asked him, should apostates like me and Armin be killed, right here on the show, and he told us, he said that, well, no, but in an ideal Islamic state, which he supports, he wants there to be an ideal Islamic state. He's like, yes, you'd be given 3 days to change your mind. If you don't, then yes, that's capital punishment.
So I have a question actually about that. That's a very good place because, see, so you hear people say like, I don't support killing gay people or ex-Muslims now. Maybe when Islam dominates and we make the whole world Muslim, we have an Islamic state then. But don't worry right now. You're fine. We can get along right now. But a lot of people point to that and say, like, look, these people, even though they don't want to kill gay people or ex-Muslims right now, they still think that there's a situation where it's okay, and that makes them evil. But I still don't think these people are technically like they. It's not. I don't think they want this to be the case. Do you know what I mean? Like, can you tell me a little bit about? So this is a good opportunity for us to dissect what you're thinking when you're saying that. Right? Like when you say under an Islamic state, did you have any, like, what did you realize how that sounds to somebody that your friend that is pro-LGBT, that you're saying, well, under certain conditions, then yes, we will kill gay people, or did it completely just flew over your head? You go on, sorry.
I think to an extent it did go over my head a little bit because I think what people struggle with being Muslims is that the word of God in Islam is like unchangeable. That's what people struggle with when they say things like that. And that's certainly something that I struggled with. But I also think that people don't understand the finality of death anymore. I also think that they don't. I think people who live in peaceful countries and don't have to deal with these issues, I don't think they fully understand what it means to die. Or when you say that a gay person, for being gay, that they deserve to die, I think they understand fully what that means. I think they've lost some understanding of that. I don't know if this is coming across as really weird, but from what I've seen, like when I was a kid and I was talking about Islam, for me, it didn't seem like a really big deal that people were being sentenced to death for these kinds of things. Because in my head, according to God, it was okay. It was okay to sentence these people to death because God said it's okay. So I think that's what a lot of Muslims struggle with.
I think, yeah, there's a conversation that I had with a Taliban supporter many years ago. When there was a school shooting. I mean, the Taliban went into this school of kids and they shot about 130, 140 children, like ages 12 to 14 in Peshawar, Pakistan. And after that, I was online and I was talking to this guy, and he was talking about, he's like, if you're a true believer, if your faith is pure, then death isn't death. And he said the word that we use for it is intiqal, which means transition. He's like, we're not killing these people. We're not ending their lives. We're giving them a shot at a better one because they're innocent. And so I think that, I wonder if people who believe that there is an afterlife and that life continues and that they don't really take death as seriously because it's just a transition. Yeah. They say, well, he's in a better place. Even regular people, you don't have to be a Taliban supporter. You go to a regular funeral with everybody, he's in a better place now.
I don't buy that. I don't think that's a similar thing because the gay person is dying. They have hell to look forward to.
They have hell to look forward to.
But I want to go on. Sorry.
But it's still not a final thing.
So
right?
The reasoning behind the whole hudud and the punishments in Sharia is that you're punished here and not hellfire. So their whole sort of cop-out excuse would be that all his punishment would be being stoned to death. He wouldn't be punished in the afterlife for that.
Oh, so you're doing him a favor.
Basically, that's the reasoning, yeah.
Right. So, but the key differences between what you're saying and what Ali is saying is that you're saying there are a lot of people Muslims that struggle with that. Where I'm not talking. That's what I'm most interested in, right? Not the Muslims that that's fine. I don't see an issue with this. Yeah, let's God's words. We'll follow what God told us to do, and you can't change that. There are people. What I'm interested in is all the Muslims that keep saying that this is God's word, and yes, we should follow God's word, but they're uncomfortable about this. Did you notice that you were also uncomfortable about this teaching, even while you were defending it?
Yeah, there was definitely a level of discomfort, but God also says that there's some things that you may like that aren't good for you, and there are some things that you don't like that are good for you. So,
this Islam has everything covered, eh?
Well, I mean, yeah. If there's any kind of moral quandary that you're struggling with inside, there's always God. Well, hey, God said it, and then it's a very easy way to shut it off.
Even the thing you said about the kids and how the Taliban shot them up, there's stories in the Quran about how, I've forgotten his name, I think his name is Luqman, how he killed a kid. And his whole reasoning for it was when that kid grew up, he was going to be an evil man and a burden on his parents. So that's okay. He's the hero of that story.
Yeah, it's like when you go back in time, you can kill Hitler when he was a kid because he's going to grow up to do bad things. Like, yeah, it's interesting. I know it's different, but
it's very important to recognize. I mean, to people, a lot of people that are critics of Islam, I do want to point to them that there's something they have to recognize that this level of discomfort to these barbaric ideas does exist among Muslims that promote it, because that's what you need to reach to be if you want to win this battle.
Mm-hmm. I do feel that.
Yeah. I wanted to. I'm really looking forward to going in and hearing about how you left the faith and what convinced you. But before that, I wanted to talk about a thread that you posted on Twitter that I found really. I think it's a nuanced perspective that neither side really looks at. So I'm just going to read some of it. So you wrote this. You said, "I started wearing the niqab when I was 11. It was a choice, a reactionary choice after a British MP, Jack Straw, was campaigning to have it banned. I wanted to do my part in promoting the idea that I, as an individual, should be able to wear what I choose. After choosing this, my mother was reluctant to accept it. She thought it was dangerous, but my father was really excited to have me wear it. So I continued until I was about 20 years old. 9 years of hiding my person without ever questioning my choice, without quivering." So, so this is kind of interesting because you talk about how horrible niqab is in the rest of the thread as well. But you also talk about how it was a choice for you for 9 years. I mean, yes, you were a kid, you were 11, but it's not something that your parents forced you to do, but it was a choice. So can you go through that, because there's this debate out there about whether this can ever be a choice or whether it was a real choice. There's a good argument that this wasn't a choice for you because you were a child. But
there's people. There have been people coming to me saying that you were a child, this was never your choice. I was like, okay, whatever. It for me, when I tell people that I used to wear it, there's always like this room full of people sighing as if I was forced to do it. It was my choice. One of the things that I think I also said this in the thread as well. One of the things that empowered me to wear it is that nobody else in my family wore it. Nobody else in my school wore it except for one teacher. For me, it was a symbol of individualism. And when I started wearing it, I felt powerful because I felt as though I was, talking back to this MP who said that it should be banned. And even then, even when I was 11 years old, I understood that in some circumstances, I wasn't going to be able to wear it. So if I was standing in court or if I was in an airport and people needed to check me and make sure that I was who I said I was, I understood that that was something that needed to be done. And this debate has been brought up and, people have been talking about it for years. But it certainly was my choice to, go into it. As I said, nobody in my family wore it. No, there was never like the inkling that I should wear it. Nobody ever told me it's good for you to wear it. I was just like, this guy wants to have it banned. I'm going to wear it because I don't think it should be banned.
So this is, I think, one of the things that we've talked about here before, is that I've talked many times about how I've known young women who are in ideological opposition to the hijab and niqab, right? Like they have rebelled against their parents. I don't want to wear this. Why are you making me wear it? And so on. But then on the other hand, when someone like Jack Straw or Donald Trump comes and says we're going to ban Muslims or we should ban the hijab or ban the niqab, then the choice to wear it as an identity, that comes in. So in a way, they're not choosing to wear it because they don't agree with the ideology, but they're also choosing to wear it as a form of identity. So were you ideologically in line with what the niqab represents, even when you chose to wear it in defiance?
What do you mean? Ideologically, in the sense that this is my place as a woman?
No, more as in when you chose to wear it. I mean, you chose to wear it in a way, as you say, out of defiance to this politician who was saying it should be banned. But did you think that the niqab was justified just from a rational basis? So if you forget about the MP, forget about everything, did you think while you were wearing it that, okay, I'm going to wear this because I agree with what this represents for women?
Oh, I was 11 years old.
Yeah.
She was 11 years old, yeah.
I didn't think that, obviously. I do, like, in retrospect, I also posted in that thread how it wouldn't be a symbol of individualism if everyone had to wear it. As an Islamic state would probably say that you would have to wear it for every single woman. So my reason for wearing it was very, very different to what the actual ideology behind it is.
Right.
And that is what I didn't understand as an 11-year-old girl who was just like, fuck you, Jack Straw, I don't want to wear, I don't want you to tell me what I can and can't wear. So, yeah.
That's very interesting because when I became religious in my school, I actually my school was most of the students in my school were very liberal, and they kind of saw the religious kids as these weirdos. And when I was becoming religious, I actually did want to stand out as different from the rest of them. And I suspect that, and the fact that, some people recognize that I'm the only one in class that doesn't skip a prayer. When my religion teacher mentioned that, I felt very proud, right? That, like, when he noticed that, right? And I think that if I could signal it even more, if I was a girl, I would probably be wearing the hijab if I was a girl in that environment. Like, when I wanted to even stand out, to even show how different I am from the rest of them even more, which is, well, I mean, actually that wouldn't make sense because in Iran everybody's forced to wear the hijab. But I'm just saying, if I was in a country where girls had the choice to wear the hijab, I would probably be wearing it. But you mentioned that your family, nobody in your family wore it. So your family was less religious than you?
My family as a whole, so my extended family, were not religious up until my father became religious. He's the oldest son in that family. So once he became religious, everybody kind of followed him into becoming more religious. So, I think there probably was a part of me that was kind of like, I want to be more religious, so my dad, thinks that I'm on his side and, is proud of me for being more religious and, like, really taking the baton from him. But that
is kind of cute, and like, I want to be more like my dad is kind of cute. But go on, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there definitely was a part of me there. I'm the oldest of six siblings, so I was the one that was kind of left on my own. I was the guinea pig. I did everything before everyone else. So it was difficult, first of all, to be more religious than anyone else in my family, and then also to leave religion before anyone else in my family.
Wow.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of explore this a little bit more. There's a lot of debate right now about, like, this, a lot of discourse about the hijab and niqab, and you have the recent here in Canada and Quebec, they've banned religious symbols in government positions. You've had, so in this case, on the one hand, we want to speak out against this. People want to talk against the niqab and all of this, and how it represents the subjugation of women. But on the other hand, when you hear certain politicians talk about it, then your reaction was to go ahead and wear it, even as a kid. And you're not the only one. There's a lot of people I know who've actually started, donning these religious symbols because of some of the rhetoric that is coming out, mainly from some of these sort of right-wing Western politicians. So do you think that how should we have a conversation about this? How should they have a conversation about it?
The
pressure
way
is on.
that I deal with it, the way that I deal with it is that I believe in the individual. I believe that everyone should have a choice to wear whatever they want to wear and believe whatever they want to believe. I think the problem with right-wing, with anyone saying that something should be banned, is that it immediately causes a forbidden fruit effect where everybody suddenly wants to do it now, or everybody wants to support it. And that's what I really don't appreciate. We had it in the UK, I think it was last year, where a former mayor of London, his name is Boris Johnson, he was also speaking out to ban the niqab. And people hated that because he had referred to women wearing the niqab as highway robbers and letterboxes and things like that. And it's just so... There are better ways of bringing up the issue and talking about it and, making a joke out of it. People are so sensitive about it. And I think that to some extent we should respect that sensitivity. Obviously, I'm more for mockery and stuff like that. Jokes and stuff are great. But when it comes to actual legal issues, when it comes to, cutting off people's freedom to choose something, it should be treated with a lot more sensitivity, in my opinion.
What about?
I agree with you. Yeah.
So what if somebody says, "Well, I agree with you on that in public places, but not in the court, not in government not if you're doing a government job, or not if it's covering your face, because even if it's in public, if it's covering your face, that's a security issue, and it seems like other people that cover their face, it's not like we're taking, it's more than a right up, it seems, when it comes to religion. It seems like it's a privilege. Like other people need to seem to be having to follow certain rules, but you get to not follow certain rules because it's religion. Like they say, like, I'm all for giving people the choice to wear whatever they want, but when it goes beyond a right and turns into a privilege, then that's where we need to draw the line. What do you think about that?
Well, in terms of, like, I've been around a lot of Muslims throughout my life. I've never come across someone who wears niqab that will refuse to take it off if someone said that I need to check your identity, or we have a security risk and we need you to take it off. I've never met anyone who would absolutely refuse to do that. Me personally, I used to take it off all the time if somebody needed to check. Even like on our buses, as a kid, we have ID cards that let us go on the bus for free. Anytime that someone had to check my identity, I would take it off, because I understood that was a security measure. And I've never come across someone who would blatantly object to doing that. Obviously, when it becomes a risk and people are, becoming belligerent because they don't want to show their face when it's a security risk, then it becomes a problem. And I do think that things like that need to be talked about. However, the problem is that people aren't treating it seriously to some extent, because people keep making it about looking a certain way and finding it scary to look at. Like, we need to go beyond that in order to talk about these things.
Yeah, I think a lot of the rhetoric around is based on the ick factor. Like, oh, this feels icky. It's strange to me that for example, in France and Germany, when they talk about banning the niqab and the hijab, they talk about that. But whenever anybody talks about banning, like, neonatal circumcision, baby circumcision for little boys, for no reason, completely healthy, which is also a religious marking, and it's done to little kids without their consent, and it's irreversible. Everyone's like, no, it's anti-Semitic to ban that. It's really strange that certain religious markings is okay.
I get the sense, though. Sorry, go on. You go first, and then I'll.
I think that as human beings, anything we're not like anything that we don't grow up around, we're going to find weird. I don't find it an argument to just say, I don't like the look of this, therefore it should be banned. Or I feel uncomfortable around this, therefore it should be banned. There are tons of things that I never grew up around that I personally find not the most, palatable thing to look at, but it doesn't necessarily mean that nobody should ever do it, because, I don't like it.
Right. So I was going to say something that I forgot. Okay, but I follow a lot of Islamic sources, far right sources, far left sources, and what I do get, that's most of the content I consume, is when I do follow Islamic sources, I do get the sense that they are actually happy about the hijab, people trying to come up with rules against hijab. Really? I think, because I think, like, in Western countries, they are losing the narrative that they're victims. And I think, like, this is really playing well in their hand, because that's what they need. This I'm not talking about the community.
Who's losing the narrative?
The people that want to mobilize Muslims as a force against the oppressors of Muslims, right? I think this really helps this really helps them. This is a really good thing that is happening to them to make them more relevant again.
Yeah, it definitely drives the more extreme version And this goes back to the whole like Sharia punishment stuff again. Like I think that a lot of Muslims have like this utopian idea of the Sharia, that everything is going to be fixed and the world is going to be great, and everybody's just going to be walking around with gold around their necks and nobody's ever going to get mugged again if the Sharia is there, because it's so utopic and it's the law of God and it will just be great. I think that's what a lot of Muslims think, but they don't really understand. Like I've seen, for example, I don't really follow her. I've only seen a couple of screenshots of her tweets, but Linda Sarsour was saying that Sharia is great because you can never deal in interest again. You'll never have to pay back a loan over the amount that you borrowed or whatever.
Who would loan you money if they couldn't have interest? Like nobody would lend you money either.
Exactly. But it's also just a case of like, oh, so you're just going to pick out all the good things in Sharia and then push all of that, but then hide all the crazy stuff about cutting off people's hands from the opposite sides and, like crucifying them and, stoning them we're just going to hide all of that. But the interest thing, let's push that narrative.
When I think
we were told in school that when Imam Mehdi comes back and the world becomes Islamic, when companies want to pay their employees, they'll just put a giant bag of money outside the door, and people will go and they just know they will just pick as much as they think they deserve. Like that's how much trust there will be in society. That
there's one of the biggest problems with the whole dialogue is that you talk to 10 different Muslims about what Sharia means and you get 10 different definitions, and that's why I really think that we should start talking about scripture. And what the Quranic scripture that everybody agrees on, that's not is because I remember if you talk to Khizr Khan, the Gold Star, the father of that soldier who died in Iraq, in the U.S., he'll hold up the U.S. Constitution and he'll say he has all of those ideas, that Muhammad was a first feminist, Muhammad believed in freedom of speech, so the U.S. Constitution is basically identical to Sharia law. Muhammad brought this way before anybody else. So if you're a pollster for Pew or Gallup and you go and you ask Khizr Khan, or my dad, he used to think the same way. If you ask him, you're like, hey, so do you believe in Sharia law? He's like, of course I do, because it's exactly the same as what the U.S. Constitution is. And a lot of American sort of liberal Muslims actually believe that. They actually think that Sharia law is perfectly compatible with.
As someone who was a Salafi, as someone who kind of studied it from tip to tail because I had to, I can say that there's nothing farther from the Sharia than the U.S. Constitution.
No, of course. That's what I'm saying. But I'm just kind of highlighting the problem that comes about when Linda Sarsour or some of the Westerners talk about Sharia, is that they never really have what do you mean by that? Yeah, it is.
Let her say. Let her speak. Yeah.
The problem with going back to scripture, and this is what I found, is that there are 2.4 billion Muslims in the world, something like that, and they all have their own interpretation of what the scripture is. You'll talk to a Quranist and he'll reject every single hadith you have for him. He'll reject all the tafsirs. He interprets the Quran the way he interprets it. He has this completely different, all of the different works by all the different mufassirs. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all to him, because he interprets the Quran however he wants. I've met Quranists who accept LGBTQ people, and they live their lives like that, despite the stories of Lut and how his entire nation was destroyed, even though they were all gay, and that was why they were destroyed. Despite all of that, I posted a video this week about LGBTQ stuff, about how we've had protests in this country against LGBTQ-based lessons called No Outsiders, which is all about including people and diversity and all that stuff. And there have been Muslims protesting against that because they're taught about, two mums and two dads and stuff like that. We've had, children being pulled out of those schools. We've had Brunei, legalizing the punishment for stoning to death for gay people, stuff like that. And I made a video about that. And you have people in the comments saying that there's all these problems in the West, and the West is evil, and this and that. And if Islam was put into place, then none of these problems would exist. people have this idealized, romanticized version of Islam in their brains because of, I think, partially because of the stigmatism around Islam that we had seen previously in like the last 10 years. And they have this romanticized version of Islam now because they've been told for over 10 years that Islam is all about peace and Islam is loving and we accept people and all that
Feminism,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff. And now they have this picture of it, and when you show them proof about specific things, they're like, no, that's not true, you're just making that up. So I don't know how you would combat that with scripture when to them the scripture is all made up.
But the same thing happens with the definition of Sharia, right? Everybody has their own interpretation of it. This is what the problem is with and that's why, like Armin and I have always said, like Islam is not monolithic, but Muslims, like Islam is monolithic, but Muslims overall are not. Yeah.
Yes.
It's actually, but I think that
I mean, let's clarify that. Even if Islam does have different branches, there is a core to it. That core is monolithic. Is that how you say it?
Yeah. Monolithic. I mean, it's not pretty much straight up. It's clear.
Right. So it's not like there's a core element to it that doesn't change, but there are different branches. Yeah, but go on. And we have a problem with the core. Yeah.
Even the core is reinterpreted in however way that suits people.
Right.
For example, a really extreme branch, like from where I came from, would believe that, the killing the Kafirs verses is about the end times and we're supposed to fight against them. That is the reason that it's there. For people who don't want to do that and don't want to go to jihad and don't want to kill people, that verse is restricted to a time where there was jihad and it doesn't exist anymore, and it's only for when Imam Mahdi comes back and we have an Islamic state and all that stuff. Everybody interprets the book in whatever way they want to interpret it.
So the core that doesn't change, that I think is the source of all these problems, is the idea that revelations on faith is a good source of information and living a life, right? That is the part that is unanimously the same, and that is the source of all this problem.
Yeah, it goes across all religions too, like the revelation and faith. I mean, that is the most toxic thing, because the faith essentially is a way of saying that, okay, believe rumors, like believe hearsay, things, because faith is, again, I don't have knowledge that this lamp I'm looking at exists. I don't have faith that it exists. I have knowledge. I know that it exists, but faith by definition means to believe in something that you have no proof of, that you can't see, that you can't perceive. So the whole idea is that someone told me you just have to believe it. Revelation, faith. So that's the most toxic part of it. But so speaking of faith, let's move on to, you said February 2017 was around the time that you lost yours. So you had, you're a niqabi, you come from a Salafi background, you're part of the Tableeghi Jamaat, you're teaching Quran and Qiraat to other girls. You're pretty heavily ensconced in this. Yeah. And then, so what causes you to give it up?
So I denounced it in February 2017, but I was doubting it from, I would say, February of 2015. So I had a lot of doubts from then. Part of it was a lot of different things were happening in my life. My mother had passed away in 2013. My father was kind of a maniac. He was really crazy. He was very abusive, physically, mentally, all kinds of stuff. And my first sort of doubt was about destiny and qadr and God knowing everything that's going to happen, but still creating situations where people have to commit evil, or evil in his book. So my first qualm or disagreement with God was that to save myself and my siblings from my dad, I had to disobey my dad. And I did not understand why God would put me in a position where I would have to disobey both him and my father, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Actually,
wait, how did you have to, can you explain, how did you have to save your siblings and yourself?
So my father was very, very abusive to both me and my siblings. And it got to the point, like, my dad wouldn't just, like, smack us and be done with it. He would really beat us. Like, he would beat us into a coma. Like, it would be really, really bad. So I had to go against him by reporting him to the social services, by trusting the kafirs to take care of my problems, basically.
Kafirs
And
is unbelievers. Right?
yeah.
No, I'm just telling for our audience. Yeah, go on.
Okay. But yeah, and that was my biggest problem. Like, why would God facilitate this issue for me, where I would either have to patiently wait for my dad to kill me, or go against him? Like, why would that be like my situation? Why would that be my test?
So you think that by calling the officials, you were disobeying both your dad, which is un-Islamic, and you're also disobeying God because you're going to the unbelievers and asking them for help. Is that what you're saying? The conflict?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was my conflict. And then it also became because I was taught, it was really drilled home to me that you couldn't disobey your parents if it wasn't in conflict with God and his messenger.
So if I was a Muslim, the standard answer to that would be that, well, God puts you in difficult positions specifically to test your faith. That's what the answer would be.
I'm explaining my test of faith. My test of faith was to either die in that house or to go and seek help, which is the much better option. But it became a question of disobeying my parents, which is a grave sin. God mentions himself and the worship of him next to obeying parents. That's how grave a sin it is. And there are narrations about if your parent doesn't forgive you before they die, then you can't enter paradise. You can't even smell it. So it really got me to question God. Like, why would he create all these arbitrary rules? Like, for example, if you drink, your prayers aren't accepted for 40 days. If you go to a seer or if you read your future, if you go to like a palm reader or whatever, your prayers aren't accepted for 40 days. If you die...
I didn't know that one. Okay.
Zara K, she told me that you were a Shia. Your sources might be different. But...
Not a real Muslim.
But the first one I had, the first one was, I knew about that one, that if you drink alcohol, you can't. Not only your prayers will not be accepted for 40 days. You shouldn't pray because now praying is a sin because you have alcohol in your blood.
We were told the opposite because your prayers won't be accepted, but you still had to make those prayers because they would be counted against you if you didn't pray.
Wow.
You still pay for them, but even though in the Quran it specifically says don't pray when you're drunk, you still have a cost for missing those prayers. It still counts against you.
All right, but go on, yeah.
And also, I didn't understand, like, you have, for example, in Christianity, you have the 10 Commandments, and if you commit those sins, they're like the most grave sins or whatever. You have 7 deadly sins. In Islam, the most grave sin.
Just a correction. The 7 deadly sins is not Christianity. That's just Dante. It's the 10 Commandments. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I get my bullshit confused. So.
Yeah.
Bullshit is bullshit. Yeah. Go ahead.
But I really question because there's a list of 10 sins, I think, which is the most grave sins that you can commit, and the gravest sin you can commit it's the only sin that God cannot forgive you for after you die, is to put other gods beside him, to worship more than one God. Shirk, right?
Yes.
And I'd never understood that. You can murder somebody, but God can forgive you for that. You can rape someone, God can forgive you for that. You can go to a magician and practice magic, God can forgive you for that. Whatever. Any stupid thing you do, God can forgive you. But as soon as you tarnish his pride, he can't forgive you for that.
Yeah, so, the interesting thing is that in the 10 Commandments, excuse me, I had to cough. The 10 Commandments, that it's all about serving God. The first 3 are about serving God. There's nothing about rape in there. Rape isn't even mentioned. Like, it's not even in the Quran. It's like there's nothing about rape.
I guess everybody did it back in the day, so it was.
All right, but you were making a point. But go on. So yeah.
I didn't understand that. Also, like, why that was the most heinous crime. Other things came into play where you would read the life of the Prophet, and one of his uncles, Abu Talib, was like the most loving to him, the most caring to him, but he goes to hell just because he stayed on the religion of his forefathers as a mushrik, as someone who worshipped more than one god. And his punishment, and the whole reason for even stating that story was because the lowest punishment in hell is that he'd be burned up to his ankles and his brains would boil in because of the heat of that fire. So I didn't understand, like, the man was a good man, but he still goes to hell. God has still damned him. So I had all these questions and I couldn't really find answers. I did seek help from like learned people. They had like talk shows on Islamic channels where you could ring in and ask your question, and I would ask those questions.
Oh, really?
And I just wouldn't find them satisfying.
Do you have recordings of the times you called into the shows? You should go find them.
I don't think so, but I can look them up.
Yeah, look them up. Okay. That's so cool. All right, go on.
And I just like, it's not that I didn't want to believe. I wanted to believe. Like, I wanted to find the answer to this, because at this point I had dedicated my entire like conscious life to it since being 11 years old. I had dedicated all this time, all this research, all this study. I had taught other people in it. Like, I didn't want to let it go, but at the same time, there was so many. It wasn't even like the science stuff. The science stuff I could forgive. It's not important to me. It was the theological stuff. Like, the nature of this God is so contradictory to how he describes himself. You know, he describes himself as merciful and gracious, but as long as it doesn't harm him, as long as you don't affect his pride, then he's merciful and he's gracious. Otherwise, he'll burn you in hell for the tiniest slight that you do on him.
See, I think this is something that I notice a lot. And this is why I tell people you don't need to have a scientific background to realize that this doesn't make sense. The sheer unfairness of it. Most people with no degrees of education can that resonates with them. That this just doesn't seem fair, and that's something that you could communicate with a lot of people. So
I don't know, because at first I had told this story on Out of the Fold podcast, where I'm a co-host now, but at the time I wasn't. He had taken my interview and I'd told my story, and I had said that I always felt like my story wasn't valid because it didn't have any science background. There was no like hard evidence to disprove anything. It was just a feeling. It was just, this doesn't seem fair. But after releasing that, I found a lot of people sort of communicating through Twitter and things like that, coming to me and saying that I had a similar journey out of my own religion and things like that. So, you know, I think that we put science on a pedestal. I mean, I'm not against science. I love science, but I think we put it on a pedestal when it comes to religion because it's like the only thing fighting religion. But I do feel like human empathy and just understanding that things are unfair can also go a long way in explaining why a God is unfair.
I'm so happy. I'm so glad that you're saying this, because this is what I've been telling people, because a lot of people think like, oh, the atheist community, they're scientific. And like, no, most of them don't have no background in science. And
I don't have a background in science. I'm a humanities student. I hate science to an extent.
I have a huge background in science, but I still completely agree with you.
No, yeah, but the point is that if we want to fight against religion, we have to work with what we have, and most people do not understand science, but most people understand kindness. Most people understand fairness, and you can really point to people how unfair and how unkind this religion is. And I'm not saying we shouldn't tell people. I mean, I wrote an entire book showing how illogical God is, right? So I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but that is not going to get us the masses, because the masses do not have a background in logic or in philosophy or in science. But that's okay, because even though most people don't understand that, most people are kind. And that's what we need to appeal to show them how barbaric these ideas are.
Yeah, and basic human empathy, I think, can go a really, really long way. I had done my short, like, why I left Islam video. That's like 11 minutes long. But I also did a video clarifying that because I feel like a lot of people didn't understand it. And I was kind of crying. I was like in my feelings. And I had said that how can you accept a God that will burn you simply because you don't believe in him? How can you accept a God? It's the same as a mother taking her baby and then roasting him alive because he doesn't believe you exist.
Exactly, that's the example I use. That's perfect. I'm so in love with this, with the things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But
this is it kind of reminds me of, I think one of the most basic and irrefutable arguments for this is what Epicurus said, generally, and I'm going to paraphrase it. And if he's able to stop evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he just unwilling to do it, just doesn't do it,
mm,
right? Then he is cruel. And if he is unable to stop it, but he's willing to do it, then he's not God. He's just not.
No, this is not the same.
This is also just. Sorry.
No, I'm talking. I know it's not the same thing, Armin. I'm saying that this is in addition to it. I think that for me just represents the absolute, crux of the illogic of this whole God issue.
But not only is he cruel, he's psychotic because he facilitated all of it.
Exactly.
He knew everything that was going to happen. He knew from the day that he came into being that creating Iblis or Lucifer, whatever you want to call him, the devil, that something was going to go wrong here, and like 90% of his creation was going to burn in the fire that he created, but he still went through with it.
Actually, there's a huge difference between these 2 points that you're saying, and I suggest going with the hell argument, right? Because I really don't think the argument of evil is a very convincing and strong argument. Most people, it's not. But if you just point to the hell itself, because that's God's creation itself, and what it is for, the example that you mentioned is the perfect example. Like, let's say you're a parent that says, like, I work so hard for you, as I work and I bring you food, I give you shelter, but you're my son, and you don't even you don't ever thank me, and you don't even recognize my existence. So in the oven you go. Like, most people understand that doesn't make any fucking sense. So right, and I think that resonates with people.
And also, God is self-proclaimed meant to be more loving than your mother, 40 times, 100 times, million times, whatever. A mother would never do that to her child.
Right. So the The counter argument to that is, Muslims will say, again, I know all the most of the counter arguments because I follow them a lot, is that this is what atheists don't understand. Okay, if you don't thank your mother for helping you, that's bad. But if you could understand how great God is, and how awesome he is, and how kind he has been to you, then you would understand that not thanking God and not recognizing him, how big of a sin that is. Because you have to make the punishment to match the crime. The only reason why this is such a big crime is because of how great God is. And the reason why atheists don't understand why this is a big crime is because they don't understand the greatness of God. Right? So this is their counter argument. Have you heard that before?
I've heard this one more so when I was a Muslim, but it still doesn't go against my argument. Because if the punishment is to go against the crime, the crime is that you don't believe in something, right? Or you don't agree with something that God did. So how is roasting for eternity, how does that fit the crime? Also, the crime is finite. The crime is temporary.
No, it's not. They say the crime is not finite because you committed against something that was not finite. So your crime is also not finite. Yeah,
but I'm finite. So therefore, the crime is finite.
Okay, but my counter would that be, well, if the God is the greatest, he should also have the greatest humility, more humility than my mom. So he should be like, I don't need credit. I'm God. Who gives a shit that you're not thanking me?
I mean, God just seems like this seventh grader who made an art project and really, really wants to be recognized for what he did. So
that's good.
With all the shit that went on it, like he painted something wrong and he sort of fucked up this part, but he wants to be recognized for everything else.
That's great.
So, Faye, are you? You said you have several siblings, right? I mean, you're the oldest of six.
Yeah.
You said.
I have 5 siblings. I'm the oldest of 6. Yeah.
And are you still in touch with them since you did this and you left? What is your status with your relationship with your dad, if there is any, and your siblings?
I don't have any relation. I haven't had a relationship with my dad since 2015. I have made an effort not to interact with him again, just based on the entire family's reaction to the situation. Right. With my siblings, I did try to interact with them, but I've been barred for a while because they were too scared that I would influence them in some way. So
reactions. You mentioned reaction. What are those reactions?
The reaction to reporting my dad was that I shouldn't have done it, that I should have kept praying and should have been patient, that the same things used to happen to them and they were patient about it. Look where they are now. And, none of it was suitable at the time. It's still not suitable now. It was just a mess because everybody sort of took his side despite what he did and were against me. So it was a mess.
What about the reaction to you leaving Islam?
Oh, I'm completely cut off. I don't have contact with any of them. I live by myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
One thing that I want to focus on that you mentioned is the fact that, okay, so you were from a Salafi, very religious family, no jihad, no killing any apostates or any kafirs. And this is, but I want people to remember your story because a lot of people, when they think about, fighting against Islam or the cost of religion as a whole, they just think about explosions and terrorist attacks, right? Yeah. And I always say, like, no, the cost of religion, that's just a fringe example that just gets on the news, right? Like your story, like the time that your father spent in the mosque, or the money that you guys donated to, I don't know what it went to, or to the fact that so many other girls are being beaten up by their parents and the kids won't report them because they don't think it's religiously acceptable to tell the government. Or I don't know, like if you were still there, I don't know how much of a choice would you have to choose your partner? I don't know how that works with your family, but
I had no choice. That was a whole other drama. We can talk about that. But you basically have no choice. Your entire life is just planned for you.
Yeah, and again, that like not being with the person that you would love. Imagine not having a family that eventually will work because it was chosen for you. Like all these costs, if you add them all together, they add up to a lot more, and they don't get that much attention. People just only pay attention to the stuff that is on the news, but the cost of religion is way more than just that.
Mm-hmm.
But
on an individual level, the cost is much greater. You're right.
Right, and can you actually tell us a little bit about that? The drama regarding you not being chosen for you.
So the whole marriage thing happened. I think it happened it was in 2014. It was late 2014. I had been asked to marry people since I was 15. And I was being set up with people. I think the first guy who came to see me, he was 26 and I was 15. It was a mess. There definitely wasn't a choice there. With the last guy, I had refused to marry him, and there was still like a lot of emotional blackmailing go on, like, oh, your mother would have wanted this, or if you don't do this, you won't find another guy. You know, who
Why?
else is like, after I reported my dad, oh, nobody's ever going to trust you, you're never going to get married, things like that. And in my head, I was like, if this is the reason that a guy isn't going to marry me, that's a good reason, because he's going to do something shady. That means.
Right. Oh yeah, that's a good filter. If you're not going to marry me because I reported my dad to the authorities because he was beating me, you're probably not a good fit. You're probably not a good enough somebody I should
for them,
be with.
that was like, even just talking back to people who were older than me, and I don't know if this is Islamic or not, it's more like in Bengali culture, you're not supposed to talk back to anyone who's older than you. Just talking back was like, how dare you? How dare you have a voice and have an opinion about this? This has nothing to do with, it's our choice to choose who you marry. But yeah, and you know, even after I had left the house, I was still living with family. There were family members who wouldn't talk to me at all because I had refused to marry this person.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Islam is an incel's dream come true.
Exactly, it really is.
Wow. So, yeah, Faye, thank you. I mean, again, thanks for coming on. I wanted to ask you one more thing about, your podcast, which is Out of the Fold.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks really interesting. I was just checking it out. And so what is that about, and when did you join it? I think you weren't always a co-host, right, on that?
No. The main host is Cole, and he interviewed me, I think it was a few months ago. I can't remember the exact date. But I joined that, I think, in March. So we do a weekly podcast where we just talk about life and current affairs and things like that. And we just share our perspectives on it, and whoever listens. But the main show is people coming on, people from all kinds of backgrounds. So ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Mormons, ex-Jews, ex-Muslims, all kinds of people come on, and they just tell the story of how they left faith and why they left. And usually they'll start from like, I was born in this town and this is what I was raised on, and they will get to a point where they'll talk about other things like mental health and what really brought them out. Yeah, it's a really interesting show. And I'm not just saying that because I'm the co-host. I used to listen to it even before that.
Yeah, but, it looks really interesting, actually.
It's a good show.
Yeah,
so it's a podcast. Do you also have a YouTube channel for it?
Not at the minute. We're trying to get more support for it. At the moment, it's only on Spotify and a couple of other like sound-based apps like
iTunes,
Podbean and
Google Play,
stuff like that. iTunes, yeah.
Yeah. If it's on iTunes, that means it's already on most Google podcast apps. If people just search for it, what's the name again?
It's called Out of the Fold.
Out of the Fold. And
the Twitter handle is Outfold Podcast. And I know you've had some guests that will be familiar to our listeners. I mean, you've had Zara K. You've had Nick Gray, both of them who've been on this podcast as well, and we had really good episodes with them. And I also wanted to bring up the other project that you're involved with again, the other two people who are running this have been on this podcast too. So it's a very nice sense of completion, and that's Faithless Hijabi. So you are involved in that with Zara K and Omema. So can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
So Faithless Hijabi is all about supporting women who are either questioning religion, who are questioning Islam, or have left Islam and they just want to share their stories. It's similar. My personal hand in it is that I manage their Instagram account. I create the posts. I edit the stories so that they're coherent and they're also quite concise, so it doesn't go over the word limit. A lot of the time it's stories about how people were brought up and how they were treated as women while they were Muslims up until they left, or as of now, as they're still Muslims living with family. And that's what I do. A lot of the time, our Facebook page is where we receive all the stories. So feel free to go there if you have a story to tell us. I think the last two that I posted were about a convert to Islam who had left Islam, and nobody takes her seriously because she's just a white girl who was tricked into joining Islam and now has left. And that was really interesting to read, and I really felt for her because it makes sense that nobody understands that. And the other story was about a girl who was raised in an Islamic family, and she's not been allowed to do anything else but besides come out of college and just be like someone who works in her own house, cooking and cleaning and stuff, which is, I would say, is pretty commonplace.
So what about your own personal Twitter account? Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, Twitter, YouTube.
My Twitter handle is Anger Spread Thin. On YouTube, it's just my name, Fay Rahman. I just post whatever there. It's not curated. It's just whatever I feel.
Good. That's okay.
No, it's actually great because that's how I found. I think I reached out to you after I saw that video, your video for Why I Left Islam. I think that the way that you have thought through things, especially just here, the conversation we had about why you rejected your faith and what led you to that, and then also about your view on the niqab and how the discourse around that, how it can be helpful, how it can be hurtful. I think it's very, very well thought through. And I think it's a fresh perspective that I don't think a lot of people have been exposed to, especially from someone who's lived that. So I think you're a very valuable voice, and you're obviously very, very articulate too. So you really are an asset to this entire sort of movement, and the fact that you're speaking up and talking about this is, I think it's just a benefit to the entire community. So thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, I'm happy to do it. It gets all my mental screaming out, and I don't have to deal with it. But also, I found that in this community, with the atheist community, the ex-Muslim community, the far right community, everybody's on an extreme all the time, and I don't always understand it. Like, for example, a few months ago with the Shamima Begum fiasco, where there was the ISIS bride who wanted to come back to the UK, said she didn't regret anything. Everyone had a very extreme view on that. Either that she was a vulnerable child that needed to be brought back and de-radicalized, or she's a criminal and she should be kept out. And my view was that she committed a crime. She deserves to be punished for it. But she's still a British citizen, and we can't leave, people who have these ideas in their head out in the wilderness amongst other people who have the same ideas, so they can regroup and become the problem again.
We had a very detailed discussion about this, but I wouldn't say that everybody. I do agree with you that we do have our fair share of extreme views. I just want to make sure, I do want people to get exposed to that within the atheist community, because a lot of we do have a lot of also great people, right? That people with a lot more nuance as well. But I do want to point to the fact that I do want people, when within the atheist community, there are also a lot of views, both on the far right and also on the far left, and also other weird, bizarre views in between, that I think that when people do leave religion, they need to be exposed to, so that they don't go and make claims, that, I think all atheists are great. I think all ex-Muslims are great. I mean, what we're trying to do is to normalize atheism, or normalize believing as being an ex-Muslim. We don't want to cross the line to say okay, we actually think we are better people. We don't want to also suggest that we want privileges or anything like that. So part of normalizing that involves not crossing that line. And part of to be able to not cross, to be able to make sure that we don't cross that line, we need the new atheists and new ex-Muslims to see these other people with views like this. So that they also get like, okay, yeah, I agree with these people that there is no God, but let me not become too tribal about this new community that I found.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a good thing that they are exposed to that, I think.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we've done on this podcast is really try to make an effort to bring people on who have thought these things through. Like, you know, like with you, like for instance, you know, the whole niqab view is one is that everybody should be allowed to wear it. It's a symbol of liberation. It's a this or that. And then on the other hand, it's like, you know, ban it. Everybody wears it as like a letterbox, like what Boris Johnson said. And just to get people on who've actually been through it and they can provide a nuanced perspective on this. And I think a lot of the voices that we've had here, especially the ex-Muslim voices, we very deliberately seek out the people who will bring about that perspective of thought through ideas rather than just
well, I mean,
because you know you had the initially, you know, you had the scourge that was a regressive left and all these sort of apologetic liberals, and then they tried to overcorrect for that, and when then overcorrecting that just became that it just overcorrected to the point of lunacy. You know, where the other side is it's sometimes even worse than what they were originally fighting. And so I completely agree with you, especially online. There's a tendency for people to get very, very
people get really upset. People get really upset about it, and I think it's because I've left religion and stuff like. I just don't take it as seriously, and I think people get really annoyed that I don't take it as seriously as they do.
You've got the right perspective. It's just that you can't take it seriously. Like anybody who made any kind of big sort of transformational change, they immediately met a whole lot of, you know, the majority of people oppose them. So, you know, the first woman who went to university, or the first black person who went out and spoke out, the first gay person who came out of the closet, like they always, 90% of the people opposed them. So imagine if Twitter was around then. And they came out and they said, you know, yeah, and then they'd have to apologize because you can't be afraid of immediate reactions. You can't be afraid of what everybody's saying and care about it. You can't, if you think what you're doing is right, you need to go and push forward and just fuck everybody else who's coming at you, because that is just the nature of how it's always happened in history. You are going to get opposition.
Guys, I have to prepare for my next show, so I'm going to go. Right.
So, Fay, again, thank you very much. Any last thing you want to say to other people who are like you and other people who may have been in positions like you? Message?
My whole message is to just be honest with yourself. Honestly, if you're not honest with yourself, then you're doing yourself a disservice. In any instance, if you are convincing yourself something is true when you know it's not true, the only person you're harming in that instance is yourself. You owe it to yourself to find the truth. And I don't care what that truth is. If you think Islam is the truth, go for it. It's not my problem if you think that is the truth. But you owe it to yourself to find out what that is.
Thank you. That's really well said. Anyway, thanks again for being on this. We're going to see everybody next time. Appreciate it. Until next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, and stay in touch.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for having me on the show. Yeah. I really appreciate it.
Secular Jihadists is an increasingly influential podcast with much of its growing audience in Muslim-majority countries, advocating for atheists, secularists, and Enlightenment thinkers. We want to reach out to more people. If we reach 500 patrons, we will be able to translate our shows into Arabic, Urdu, Persian, Bengali, Malay, Turkish, and other languages in these countries. Help us get there at patreon.com/SJME.